Well, I just had a really surprising session with my guides this morning. I was talking with them first about some ethics of channeling and feeling partisan or having partisan interests while I address political issues. And pretty soon we were talking about death vows, the impact that has on the work one chooses to do in a lifetime, soul contracts, astrology, and most importantly, we talked about why democracy is a spiritual practice. Ha! Which really surprised me. So stick around to the end. You'll hear them talk about that and a whole lot more. Here we go. Hello there, thoughtful people. I'm Terry Dactyl, the Zen Dinosaur. I'm a psychic in the channel, and welcome to my channel. We're here to talk about some politics, current events, some spiritual issues, and things that my guides want me to share with you. Footnote, this is a left-leaning channel. If you're allergic to that kind of political slant, you might want to surf on by. Trolls will be dealt with appropriately with the ban hammer. And with that, let's just move on to our topic of the day. So when I got up this morning, I was thinking about doing some readings on some political issues, and I kind of had this little internal conversation about the ethics of doing readings about political issues and through a political lens, to the extent that, we're humans and we have our biases. How much does that color a reading? Is it okay to do that? How partisan or nonpartisan should or must one be if you want to be an ethical psychic? And I was kind of mulling over things like that when my guides hopped online and had some observations to share. I want to share it with you because many of you listening to this are, shall we say, concerned about the tenor of our contemporary politics and the level of strife and division that exists in our country today. And you don't want to add to it. It's easy to be off the cuff and snark about things and be you can be strident in your political views, or you could be snarkish, as I call it. But if you don't want to be part of that pool of energy, okay, admittedly, even I go there sometimes, but for instance, I will stop myself at some point or look at what I'm doing and saying to myself, I really don't want to put that energy out there, because what we put out, we get back. And I don't mean that in an abstract, karmic kind of way. I mean, the universe is a photocopy machine. If you think of it, it takes form. Now, that form may be very transient, very fleeting, and it may only be, a thought form in your imagination. But if you put enough energy into that thought form, it will manifest, and it becomes physical in its manifestation. You do this every day. For instance, if you need an example of this, think of what you had for breakfast or what you plan to have for dinner. Now, right there, that's a thought, isn't it? But you know what? Pretty soon you're going to manifest that thought. And it isn't simply that you put energy into making dinner. It's that you had a thought, and later you had the form. That's how our world works. Often that form appears, even though no one put, obviously, any material action into making that thing manifest. A good example of that right now is the talk about civil war. One reason that people are inclining that way is because so many people are thinking that way. And so many people think that way because a smaller number of them were very vocal about acting that way. Not that they were acting, but they were putting out the thought, we should do this thing. So the more that a concept is driven by thought and energy and belief, the quicker it will manifest. Now, in regards to the Civil War concept, One reason that we are going through that right now is an astrological one. The energies around our planet right now emulate very closely what happened here in the 1860s, 1850s, 1860s. So, a century and a half plus ago, the stars were in a very similar position, and planets were very similarly aligned. So we have sort of that influence happening. And I want to say, as an aside, in case you don't know, no, astrology does not dictate your behaviors. This is nothing that one is locked into. But they influence things. They incline things in a certain direction. The reason for that is because what the stars and planets are doing, they are all living entities, and they are radiating out energy at various frequencies. And those come together at certain times harmonically or in disharmony. And things that are aligned with that vibration, things in sympathetic alignment, will sympathetically vibrate to that frequency. It's like when you pluck a string on a guitar, if you're holding it at a certain note. If the string next to it is tuned to the same note, it will start to vibrate as well. It's just that simple. So we don't have to vibrate on any particular frequency that's impinging on our isness, but we often do. And that's the reflex, that's the natural inclination. And that's why astrology has the influence and impact that it has on individual lives. But we can always look at these influences and say, I'm going to be mindful of that, and I'm not going to go that way. It's like if you're that guitar string, you can put a finger on it and damp its vibration so that it does not emulate what the string next to it is doing. So if our celestial influences right now are saying, be warlike, be full of conflict, hate your neighbor, we don't have to do that. We can choose not to do that. But people who are more asleep than awake just feel the vibration. They just feel the influence. It hits them at a subconscious level, and all they do is react to it. So they're that unfettered, unfretted guitar string just vibrating away to the harmonic frequency that's impacting upon them. So my point to that digression is that it's that kind of energy is fueling our public discourse right now. Not specifically civil war, but fractiousness and contention coming from both astrological influences and collective thought forms, and where people are in their evolutionary stage going through the reaction to the shifting earth energies. That stirs up a lot of tension and uncertainty as well. So all of these things together make for a very tempestuous stew, as it were. Now, when I engage with the public and I do readings about public issues, public personalities, about news events, and so on, I have a partisan bias of my own. In my psychic work, I try to keep that out of play as much as I can. I have another channel I'm working on for political issues, and that's going to be a significantly different tone than what you hear here. Here, in this space, I consciously make an effort to put my ego aside when I do this work. Although, I'm only human. It comes out here and there. But you can't do a good reading, a psychic reading, if you're going to come at it through a heavy lens of ego filter, because that skews what you perceive, and it skews how you interpret what you pick up. I've seen this on many psychics in their work they put out to the public. Some in particular seem to be a pretty clear channel, until we come to one public figure that triggers them, or somebody they have a real beef about, and they will impute motives to that individual, driven largely by their personal bias. rather than simply doing a clean reading on their target's energy. So I want to avoid that as much as possible. I'm sure it will happen from time to time, simply because none of us are perfect readers, and I certainly am not. So I was having this conversation about ethical reading, and I guess my question boiled down to, is it okay to do readings when I have partisan opinions that I can't keep out of the way? And they said this. First, it's important that you recognize that's going on. That can let you edit, self-edit, and validate what you are reading and how you are interpreting the information that you receive, hence what message you put out to your listeners. That's an important part of the self-monitoring process, because as a channel, you take on a responsibility to pass messages through you with as little of yourself imprinted upon that message as possible. However, your concern is actually about something a little different. You seem to be concerned that you know that some of what you say is slanted and of a partisan nature, and you choose to leave it in. Under what circumstances is that choice all right to make? Is it all right is a judgment call, and here we speak of the ethics of channeling and the ethics of the work that you are doing. But it isn't necessary to have a large discussion right now about ethics. Here's what's important for you to focus on. When you left your last incarnation, you did so with a death moment vow that was, as you put it, I'll never do that again. And what that was in that time and place was being part of the Nazi war machine and being responsible for the death of people you had helped other. Side note to listeners, we speak here of assisting in keeping Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto in World War II as a German soldier. In that incarnation, you recognized that you were caught up in something you could not stop, could not control, could not prevent, and you had no easy out. And so when you died, when a grenade blew up and killed you, you were very glad to leave the body in that moment, hence your death vow, as you sprang free from the body, saying, wow, I'll never do that again. Not only leaving that incarnational experience behind, but making a conscious choice to reject that mindset, to reject that set of behaviors that you had experienced in that lifetime, because you saw and appreciated finally on a visceral level what horrible consequences it leads to. Your immediate next lifetime is this one, and you came into this lifetime knowing that you would never be part of something like that you experienced in World War II. That set of beliefs, the fascism, the othering, the hatred of Jews, all of these things, or the hatred of any selected minority that becomes a scapegoat. All of these things have helped contribute to your open-mindedness in this lifetime. But more importantly, here in our present discussion about readings, this mindset, this death vow, becomes part of your soul contract in your next lifetime. It doesn't have to. That's a decision you consciously make when you're out of the body, but generally it will become part of your soul contract because it has such an energetic charge to it, and it feels like a compelling thing you must do, that you must honor in your next lifetime. Potentially many future lifetimes, but in this case we're speaking about this one lifetime. So you carry with you a sense of obligation and duty to help ensure that things like that do not happen again this time around. Certainly that you not participate in them, and you're living up to that part of your promise. But in the bigger picture, you have a sense of duty, again is the proper word here, that requires you to push back against what you see unfolding in your country right now. And so in that regard, when you bring partisanship into your readings or into your interpretation of readings, if you do so in a framework of, first, honoring your soul contract and your death vow, and second, attempting to portray things to listeners in a way that illustrates the ethics of an issue, ethical choices, consequences of choices, bad actors, and malfeasant behaviors. When you illustrate these things, although you may be inspired by your partisan orientation to pick out particular events, people, and circumstances, the larger lessons that come out of that larger picture is one of ethical choices, man's relationship to fellow man, what is right action, what is helpful behavior for the community that you live in, and what is not. And given the world of duality that you live in, these points often require that a level of emotional connection, what you are terming partisanship, be attached so that people can empathize with the viewpoint and feel stirred by it on an emotional level. Now, it is certainly possible to discuss all of these things from a more elevated, neutral, and shall we say philosophical viewpoint, but that does not get people engaged enough to the point where they will go out of their way to go vote, for instance, or for that matter, that they will appreciate an urgency in something like voting, because you are living in times now that require a degree of action, of active action, if there is such a thing, something with a more pointed focus and sometimes with more urgency attached, if you want to prevent the mass of your country from repeating here what happened in Germany in World War II and in the years leading up to World War II. So if you don't want that to happen here, and if you don't want to be part of that, and if you feel like, I'll never do that again, then the most efficient way to accomplish that is to put out messages that include some level of vitality, shall we say, some urgency that helps your listeners connect to why something is important, to why something matters. Now that sounds like advice to you, but for general listeners, we have something else to say. As you move through life right now, in this stage of your collective existence, do not be shy about your partisanship, but be discriminating in it. Partisanship is not simply about rooting for a team. In fact, that is the most shallow and callow level at which you can exercise partisanship. In its higher, truer form, it means you favor a faction because of what it represents and how it behaves and what it is putting out into the world. So if you look at your Democratic Party, you may not agree with all their policies or all of what they are doing, but in the current instance, they are fighting for democratic processes, democratic small d government, and they are striving to find a way to weave together the diverse tapestry of many voices and many outlooks that you have in your country, and bring them all to the table and let them all have a say, and out of that build a consensus that will let you all move forward together in a way that benefits as many as possible. That is decidedly not what the Republican Party is about. But we say again about partisanship, you must look at things like we just described about Democratic Party values, what they are striving to do, and the fact that they are supportive of democracy itself. They are not systematically and programmatically trying to undermine democratic processes, unlike the Republicans. If you choose to be partisan, do it because the group you are supporting has higher values that you subscribe to, rather than a low common denominator like, I am driven by fear and I don't trust those other people over there with any power at all, so we must keep power at all costs. That is indeed a large part of what is driving conservatives in your country right now. Although conservatives is a difficult term to use, as our channel also observes, most of what they are doing right now is not conservative, quote unquote, per se, by nature, like by any dictionary definition of conservatism. Rather, it is radical far-right, nationalistic, isolationist, and ultimately self-serving modality that is intended to keep a few powerful people in power and disregard the wishes of the great unwashed. But that is not a democratic movement in and of itself. So we would say yes, it's all right to be partisan, as long as you do not do so blindly. Partisanship is not about wearing a jersey and joining a team and blindly following the leader. Enlightened partisanship is about subscribing to a set of values that you can define that point to a higher good that is beneficial to many, not simply to a few. I'm kind of surprised that they're talking about our parties, Democrats, Republicans, what one group stands for versus the other. And I asked them, why is it that you seem to be putting a value on democracy and democratic processes? I mean, I know I feel that way, but it sounds like that's coming from you as well. And that sounds partisan on the part of my guides. Is that me interpreting something through my ego lens, or is that really coming from you? Upstairs, why does democracy matter to you? Isn't Earth life a school and we can do anything as long as we just learn and grow from it? So why should this matter? We smile at this question. Dear soul, you and all of your fellows, you know the path that you're on, in the big picture and the big scale of things. You're ascending to Source. And what is Source? Source is a collective. Source is, at its highest level, an undifferentiated mass of oneness. Your democratic processes emulate ascension, we might say, at a very small, very dense, very material plane level. Through your democratic processes, you learn to understand one another. You learn to cooperate with one another. You learn to build a whole that is made out of many smaller parts, so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This is exactly what you do on your soul journey. When you ascend from the earth plane, you will be in a collective soul family, where all of you of your cluster of similarly resonant soul sparks have incarnated on earth together, and you will rejoin on higher level dimensions when you leave the body. And then that group too has other places to go to merge with yet more of like-minded energies, and so on, up the scale you go, until eventually you reunite with Source. So you see, at your smallest level here, it is always beneficial to you, from a soul viewpoint, to work with others instead of against others. It is beneficial to listen and understand and learn from others, rather than shut them out and say they don't know what they're talking about. Ego defenses are not helpful to you in so many ways. They are not helpful to you, especially when you strive for the greater good and when you strive to work well with others and to benefit many. And this, in microcosm, as we say again, is exactly the path that you are on a soul level. So your exercise of democracy, one reason it is such a powerful force for transformation in your world, and one reason it has struck such a chord that so many people look to it. This is the real reason America could be called a shining city on a hill. It isn't because of biblical references, rather, it's because your embrace of democracy stipulates that everyone have a voice and that you work together, and therefore that you must come to some level of understanding and compromise and agreement with each other. And in this way, you harmonize the whole. At its best, America is harmonized as a whole. One reason your recent political turmoil has felt so disjointed and so disruptive of your social fabric is because it has broken the harmony that has existed. No, of course, not in perfection, but has been, for instance, at 9/11, when your country came together and everyone felt everyone was his brother and you all stood united against an outside threat. Well, your Republican Party, your right-wing factions try to recreate that kind of feeling by perpetuating the outside threat, whereas your left-wing factions and the Democrats try to perpetuate that feeling of togetherness, of oneness, being all being on the same page by internal processes, by harmonizing together instead of pointing to outside threats to force you to circle the wagons. These are two fundamentally different approaches, and it is not an exaggeration to say that the democratic processes are more in alignment with what will eventually help you down the path in terms of soul progression. You know, one of your likely paths on this world, if you manage to rein in the conflicts that are so threatening to you now, one of your likely paths is that you will indeed have a world government, not in the sense of a dictatorship, but in the same sense that America has a government and is a country created out of many states, and the same way the European Union is a union created out of many separate countries. That is a model for where the world is heading. There will come a time when all of the world is its various countries, nations, ethnic groups, refugee enclaves, because of climate change. Yes, that it's highly likely to happen. Not climate change, but enclaves of refugees, of climate migration people. That's a digression. We'll talk about that later. But in any case, all these different groups of communal interest will come together in their many numbers in order to share resources, in order to work out problems that affect everyone. Climate change is compelling you down that path, whether you want it or not. So that is another reason to foster the skills and practices of working together cooperatively. Anytime obstructionism happens in your Congress, you can pretty much be certain that that is a person or a group and an energy that is not on a higher path and is doomed to fail. If it doesn't fail now, it will fail as time progresses in your dimension, because obstruction is the very heart of not cooperating, and not cooperating is a dead end. It is an evolutionary dead end for your species and for your soul. By nature, your soul is cooperative. By nature, your soul wants to work with others because you know that there are no others. They are all you. Will your left hand not cooperate with your right because it's on the other side of your body? Of course not. We are all one. We are all interconnected. And democracy is a material plane exercise in living that reality. That's why your democracy is important, and that's why it matters on a spiritual level as well. Oh, I have chills from that. I'm going to go meditate on this. I hope that gives you as much food for thought as it has me. Thank you for being here, and I'll talk to you soon.